From the temporary evil to which we are now obliged to have recourse will emerge the benefit of an unshakable rule, which will reinstate the course of the mechanism of natural existence, which has been destroyed by liberalism. The end justifies the means. In making our plans, we must pay attention not so much to what is good and moral as to what is necessary and profitable. We have in front of us a plan in which a strategic line is shown. From that line we cannot deviate unless we are going to destroy the works of centuries. To work out a suitable scheme of action, one must bear in mind the meanness, instability and want of ballast on the part of the crowd, its incapability to understand and respect the conditions of its own existence and of its own welfare. One must understand that the might of the crowd is blind and void of reason and discrimination, and that it lends its ear right and left. If the blind lead the blind, they will both fall together into the ditch. Consequently, those members of the crowd who are upstarts from the people, even were they geniuses, cannot come forward as leaders of the mass without ruining the nation. Only a person brought up to autocratic sovereignty can read the words formed by political letters. The people abandoned to itself, for example, two upstarts from the masses, is ruined by party dissensions which arise from greed of power and honours, and which create disturbances and disorder. And it carries on. The crowd is a barbarian and acts as such on every occasion. As soon as the mob has secured freedom, it speedily turns it into anarchy, which in itself is the height of barbarism. Just look at those alcoholized animals, stupefied by the drink, of which unlimited use is tolerated by freedom. Should we allow ourselves and our fellow creatures to do likewise? The people of the Christians, bewildered by alcohol, their youths turned crazy by classics and early debauchery, to which they have been instigated by our agents, tutors, servants, governesses in rich houses, clerks, and so forth, by our women in places of their amusement, to the latter, deal with the ads, the so-called society women, their voluntary followers in corruption and luxury. Our motto must be all means of force and hypocrisy. Only sheer force is victorious in politics, especially if it is concealed in a talent indispensable for statesmen. Violence must be the principle, cunning and hypocrisy must be the rule of those governments which do not wish to lay down their crown at the feet of the agents of some new power. This evil is the only means of attaining the goal of good. Therefore we must not stop short before bribery, deceit and treachery, if these are to serve the achievement of our cause, and so forth. They do not see that in nature there is no equality, and that she herself created different and unequal standards of mind, character and capacity. It is likewise with the subjection to nature's laws. These wiseacres did not divine that the mob is a blind power, and that the upstarts elected from its midst as rulers are likewise blind in politics. That a man intended to be a ruler, although a fool, can govern, but that a man who has not been so intended, although he might be a genius, would understand nothing of politics. All this was left out of sight by the Gentiles. At the same time, it was on this basis that the dynastic rule was founded. The father used to instruct the son in the meaning and in the course of political evolutions in such a manner that no one except the members of the dynasty should have knowledge of it, and that none could disclose the secrets to the governed people. And it goes on. In the meantime, these words were eating like so many worms into the well-being of the Christians, and were destroying their peace, steadfastness and unity, thus ruining the foundations of the states. As we shall see later on, it was this action which brought about our triumph. It gave us the possibility, among other things, of playing the ace of trumps, namely the abolition of privileges, in other words, the existence of the Gentile aristocracy, which was the only protection nations and countries had against ourselves. On the ruins of natural and hereditary aristocracy, we built an aristocracy of our own on a plutocratic basis. We established this new aristocracy on wealth, of which we had control, and on science promoted by our scholars. Our triumph was rendered easier by the fact that we, through our connections with people who were indispensable to us, always worked upon the most susceptible part of the human mind, namely by playing on our victims' weaknesses for profits, on their greed, on their insatiability, and on the material requirements of man. For each one of the said weaknesses, taken by itself, is capable of destroying initiative, thus handing over the willpower of the people to the mercy of those who would deprive them of all their power of initiative. The abstractness of the word freedom made it possible to convince the mob that the government is nothing else than a manager representing the owner, that is to say, the nation, and can be discarded like a worn-out pair of gloves. The fact that the representatives of the nation can be disposed delivered these representatives into our power and practically put the appointment into our hands. 2. It is indispensable for our purpose that wars should not produce any territorial alterations. Thus, without territorial modifications, war would be transferred onto an economical footing. Then nations will recognise our superiority in the assistance which we shall render, and the state of affairs will put both sides at the mercy of our international million-eyed agents who are possessed of absolutely unlimited means. Then our international rights will sweep away the laws of the world and will rule countries in the same manner as individual governments rule their subject. Do not imagine that our assertions are empty words. Note here the success of Darwin, Marx and Nietzsche prearranged by us. So they had their part in their success, right? The demoralizing effect of the tendencies of these sciences on the Gentile mind should certainly be obvious to us. In order to refrain from making mistakes in our policy and administrative work, it is essential for us to study and bear in mind the present line of thought, the characters and tendencies of nations. The triumph of our theory is its adaptability to the temperament of the nations with which we come in contact. It cannot be successful if its practical application is not based on experience of the past in conjunction with observations of the present. We govern the masses by making use of feelings of jealousy and hatred kindled by oppression and need, and by means of these feelings we brush aside those who impede us in our course. When time comes for our worldly ruler to be crowned, we will see to it that by the same means, that is to say, by making use of the mob, we will destroy everything that may prove to be an obstacle in our way. The Gentiles are no longer capable of thinking without our aid in matters of science, and so forth. Governed by such a faith as this, liberty could be harmless in existing governments and countries without being detrimental to the welfare of the people. If it were based on religion and fear of God, on human fraternity, free from ideas of equality, which are in direct contradiction to the laws of creation, and which have ordained submission. Governed by such a faith as this, the people would be ruled under the guardianship of their parishes, and would exist quietly and humbly under the guidance of the spiritual pastor, and submit to God's disposition on earth. That is why we must extract the very conception of God from the minds of the Christians and replace it by arithmetical calculations and material needs. In order to divert the minds of the Christians from our policy, it is essential that we should keep them occupied with trade and commerce. Thus all nations will be striving for their own profits, and in this universal struggle will not notice their common enemy, but so that liberty should entirely dislocate and ruin the social life of the Gentiles, we must put commerce on a speculative basis. The result of this will be that the riches of the land extracted by production will not remain in the hands of the Gentiles, but will pass through speculation into our coffers with their offering plates, right? Or their bag of money, right? Where their money is gathered and put in, right? The struggle for superiority and continuous speculations in the business world will create a demoralized, selfish and heartless society. This society will become completely indifferent and even disgusted by religion and politics. Lust of gold will be their only guide, and this society will strive after this gold, making a veritable cult of the materialistic pleasure with which it can keep them supplied. Then the lower classes will join us against our competitors, the privileged Gentiles, with no pretense to a noble motive or even for the sake of riches, but out of pure hatred towards the upper classes. The only society known to us which would be capable of competing with us in these arts might be that of the Jesuits, but we have managed to discredit these in the eyes of the stupid mob as being a papal organisation, whereas we ourselves have kept in the background, reserving our organisation as a secret. Moreover, what difference will it make to the world who is to become its master, whether the head of the Catholic Church or a despot of the blood of Zion? But to us, the chosen people, the matter cannot be indifferent. For a time, the Gentiles might perhaps be able to deal with us. These chosen people would be those Jewish leaders, right? Because the Pharisees were in maybe Hebrew, or maybe from the Persian into the Hebrew, might actually mean, as we found, the chosen. We set at variance with one another all personal and national interests of the Gentiles by promulgating religions and tribal prejudices among them for nearly 20 centuries. We set at variance with one another all personal and national interests of the Gentiles by promulgating religious and tribal prejudices among them for nearly 20 centuries. To all this, the fact is due that not one single government will find support from its neighbours when it calls upon them for it, and opposing us, because each one of them will think that action against us might be disastrous for its individual existence. We are too powerful. The world has to reckon with us. Governments cannot make even a small treaty without our being securely involved in it. Per me reges egunt. Let kings reign through me. We have read in the law of the prophets that we have been chosen by God to rule the earth. God gave us genius in order that we should be capable of performing this work. Were there a genius in the enemy's camp, he might yet fight us, but a newcomer would be no match for old hands like ourselves, and the struggle between us would never be of such a desperate nature as the world has never yet seen. It is already too late for their genius. All the wheels of state mechanism are set in motion by a power which is in our hands, that is to say, gold. In order to secure public opinion, this must first be made utterly confused by the expression from all sides of all manner of contradictory opinions, until the Gentiles become lost in a labyrinth. Then they will understand that the best course to take is to have no opinion on political matters, matters which are not intended to be understood by the public, but which should only be reserved to the directors of affairs. This is the first secret. The second secret necessary for our successful governing consists in multiplying to such an extent the faults, habits, passions and conventional laws of the country that nobody will be able to think clearly in the chaos. Therefore men will cease to understand one another. This policy will also help us to sow dissensions amongst all parties, to dissolve all collective powers, and to discourage all individual initiative which might in any way hinder our schemes. There is nothing more dangerous than personal initiative. If there are brains at the back of it, it may do more harm to us than the millions of people whom we have set at one another's throats. We must direct the education of Christian societies in such a way that in all cases where initiative is required for an enterprise, their hands should drop in hopeless despair. Tension, brought about by freedom of action, loses force when it encounters the freedom of others. Hence come mortal shocks, disappointments and failures. By all these means we will so oppress the Christians that they will be forced to ask us to govern them internationally. When we attain such a position, we shall be able straightway to absorb all powers of governing through the whole world and to form a universal super government. We must use every possible kind of means to develop the popularity of our super government, holding up as a protection and recompense of all who willingly submit to us or become their subjects. The aristocracy of the Gentiles as a political power is no more. Therefore we need not consider it any more from that point of view. But as landowners they are still dangerous to us, because the independent existence is ensured to the resources. Therefore it is essential for us at all costs to deprive the aristocracy of their lands. To attain this purpose, the best method is to force up rates and taxes. These methods will keep the landed interest at the lowest possible ebb. The aristocrats of the Gentiles, who by the taste which they have inherited are incapable of being contented with a little, will soon be ruined. It's got down here in a footnote, it being evidently intended that the Jews should withdraw their money at the last moment. What's that? Reservoirs of colossal wealth in which even the largest fortunes of the Gentiles will be involved to such an extent that they will sink together with the credit of the government the day after the political crisis takes place. Okay, so when this crisis takes place that they're talking about, everybody will lose their money, but they'll gain it because they've drawn these out knowing ahead of time that this crisis was going to happen. Is that what this person's saying here? They withdraw their money at the last moment when they know it's going to be a sure crash. It's going to affect the non-Jew nations, Gentiles. All these plans that these so-called peoples have, is it true or is it some KGB agent just talking a lot of rubbish? Yeah, is it like a actual KGB communist plan, or is it actually something of the people that they claim have planned it? We have befooled and corrupted the rising generation of the Gentiles by educating them in principles and theories known to us to be thoroughly false, but which we ourselves have inculcated, without actually amending the laws already in force, but by simply distorting them, and by placing interpretations upon them which were not intended by those who framed them. We have obtained an extraordinary useful result. These results became at first apparent by the fact that our interpretation concealed the real meaning of the laws, and subsequently rendered them so unintelligible that it was impossible for the government to disentangle such a confused code of laws. Hence the theory arose of not adhering to the letter of the law, but of judging by conscience. It is contended that nations can rise in arms against us if our plans are discovered prematurely, but in anticipation of this we can rely upon throwing into action such a formidable force as will make even the bravest of men shudder. By then, metropolitan railways and underground passages will be constructed in all cities. From these subterranean places we will explode all the cities of the world, together with their institutions and documents. Down the bottom here it's got a footnote, probably figurative, referring to such means as Bolshevism. Or Bolshevism. Interesting. Okay, here's something here. No piece of information will reach society without passing through our control. So, is that relatable to the media, TV news, etc., etc.? There's some more methods here, ideas that they have that we're going to put in place. Put put all these things in place. No one desirous of attacking us with his pen would find a publisher, so they control that. Okay, so you can't write anything against them or about them. That's upsets the apple cart. We'd like to find something on religion, see what they can do with religion if they've already messed with it. That could verify that they actually have. We must take no account of the numerous victims who will have to be sacrificed in order to obtain future prosperity. So they come out on top, they benefit. Until the time when we attain power, we will try to create and multiply lodges of Freemasons in all parts of the world. We will entice into these lodges all who may become or who are known to be public spirited. These lodges will be the main place from which we shall obtain our information, as well as being propaganda centres. We will centralise all these lodges under one management known to us alone, and which will consist of our learned men. These lodges will also have their own representatives in order to screen where the management really lies. And this management will alone have the right of deciding who may speak and of drawing up the order of the day. In these lodges we will tie the knot of all socialistic and revolutionary classes of society. The most secret political plans will be known to us and will be guided by us in the execution as soon as they are formed. Nearly all the agents in the international and secret police will be members of our lodges. The services of the police are of extreme importance to us, as they are able to throw a screen over our enterprises, invent reasonable explanations for discontent among the masses, as well as punish those who refuse to submit. Most people who enter secret societies are adventurers who want somehow to make their way in life and who are not seriously minded. With such people it will be easy for us to purchase our object, and we will make them set our machinery in motion. If conspiracies start in the midst of it, this will mean that one of our most faithful agents is at the head of the said conspiracy. It is only natural that we should be the sole people who direct Masonic enterprises. The Gentiles frequent Masonic lodges out of pure curiosity, or in the hope of receiving their share of the good things which are going, and some of them do so in order to be able to discuss their own idiotic ideas before an audience. The Gentiles are on the lookout for the emotions of success and applause. These are distributed freely by us. That is why we let them have their success, in order to turn to our advantage the men possessed by feelings of self-pride, who, without noticing it, absorb our ideas, confident in the conviction of their own infallibility, and that they alone have ideas and are not subject to the influence of others. You have no idea how easy it is to bring even the most clever of the Gentiles to a ridiculous state of naivete by working on his conceit, and on the other hand how easy it is to discourage him by the smallest failure, or even by simply ceasing to applaud him, and thus bring him to a state of servile subjection, holding out to him the prospects of some new success. Just as our people despise success and are only anxious to see their plans realized, so the Gentiles love success and are prepared to sacrifice all their plans for its sake. This feature in the character of the Gentiles renders it much easier for us to do what we like with them. Those who appear to be tigers are as stupid as sheep, and their heads are full of emptiness. We will let them ride in their dreams on the horse of idle hopes of destroying the human individuality by symbolic ideas of collectivism.